Picture this. You are standing in a doorway somewhere. Maybe a cafe, maybe an office building, maybe your own front porch. It does not matter where specifically. What matters is that the sky, which was perfectly fine 20 minutes ago when you left without an umbrella because you checked the forecast and it said partly cloudy, has now committed to a decision that directly contradicts that forecast with the enthusiasm of someone who has never been wrong about anything in their life. It is raining, not drizzling, raining. The proper kind, where the drops are large enough to make an audible impact, and the pavement has already gone from wet to actively streaming, and you can see other people in various states of the same predicament, making the same calculation you are currently making. You need to get somewhere. Your destination is a fixed distance away. You have no umbrella, no waterproof jacket, no hat, and no options beyond exactly two. Walk at a normal pace and arrive eventually, but wet, or run and arrive sooner, but also wet, and additionally out of breath and possibly having made an embarrassing spectacle of yourself in front of people you will never see again, but will somehow still feel judged by. Here is the question, the eternal question, the question that every person who has ever been caught in the rain without shelter has asked themselves in approximately 2 seconds of frantic mental calculation. Should you walk or should you run? And here is the thing about this question. It sounds trivial. It sounds like a 5-second calculation with an obvious answer. It sounds like the kind of thing where you make a decision based on vibes and carry on with your day without ever knowing if you made the right call, but the actual physics, mathematics, and biomechanics of this question are considerably more interesting than the situation that generates it. Researchers have modeled this problem. Multiple papers have been published on it. Actual scientists with actual funding have sat down and worked out the mathematics of rain soaking in moving versus stationary human bodies, arrived at answers that are not always what intuition suggests, and added nuance that the simple run faster get less wet assumption completely misses. This is the full, scientifically honest, actually complete answer to whether you should walk or run in the rain. And it is going to change how you think about every future rainy doorway situation, even if it will not actually help you in the moment because you will still just panic and run. Start with the physics of rain itself, because understanding what rain is actually doing when it falls changes the whole framework for thinking about moving through it. Rain falls vertically when there is no wind. This sounds obvious, but think about what it means for a moving person. If rain falls straight down at a specific rate, measured in millimeters per hour or liters per square meter per unit time, then a stationary person receives rain only on their top surface. The top of your head, your shoulders, and any other horizontal surface area your body presents to the sky above you gets wet. Your front does not get wet from falling rain because falling rain comes from above, not from the front. Your back does not get wet. Your sides do not get wet. Only your top. A moving person changes this geometry fundamentally. When you move forward through falling rain, you are effectively moving into rain that would have landed in front of you. Your front surface, your face, your chest, your legs as they stride forward, is now intercepting rain that was traveling downward toward a patch of ground you are moving into. The faster you move, the more of this front intercepted rain you collect, because you are moving through more volume of rain-occupied air per unit time. So a moving person gets wet from two sources simultaneously. Vertical rain falling on their top surface, and horizontal rain, which is not actually horizontal but is effectively experienced as horizontal because your forward motion creates a relative velocity between you and the falling drops, hitting their front surface. The total wetness is the sum of these two sources. This two-source framework is the key insight that makes the walking versus running question more complex than it initially appears. Running gets you to your destination faster, reducing the time during which vertical rain falls on your top surface, but running also increases your forward speed, increasing the rate at which your front surface intercepts falling rain. The question becomes whether the time-saving benefit outweighs the forward interception penalty. The mathematical answer for the specific case of straight-down rain with no wind is that running is always better than walking when your destination is in front of you. Here is why. The amount of rain your front surface collects is determined entirely by how far you travel, not by how fast you travel. If you are going to walk or run 100 meters through vertical rain, the total number of raindrops that hit your front surface is the same regardless of your speed, because you are moving through the same volume of rain-occupied space either way. More raindrops per second when running, fewer raindrops per second when walking, but the total count of front surface raindrops accumulated over the journey is identical because the journey distance is the same. The amount of rain your top surface collects, by contrast, is determined entirely by time. Rain falls at a constant rate. The longer you are out in it, the more falls on your head and shoulders. Running halves your travel time, roughly, compared to walking. so running halves the rain your top surface accumulates. Therefore, in vertical rain with no wind, front surface wetness is identical whether you walk or run. Top surface wetness is lower when you run, total wetness is lower when you run. Running wins. This is the simple, clean answer that most treatments of this question stop at, but reality never actually gives you vertical rain with no wind. And this is where the problem becomes considerably more interesting. Wind changes everything. When rain falls at an angle, driven by horizontal wind, the geometry of interception shifts dramatically depending on your direction of travel relative to the wind direction. Consider rain driven by a wind blowing from directly behind you. The rain now falls at an angle, moving in the same direction you are moving. Your back surface, which was previously protected from vertical rain, is now being hit. Your front surface, which was receiving horizontally intercepted rain when you moved forward, now receives less because the wind is reducing the relative velocity between you and the forward-moving rain. The faster you run, the more you are keeping pace with the wind-driven rain's horizontal component, and the less your front surface intercepts. In this scenario, wind from directly behind, running faster actually moves you closer to the speed of the rain's horizontal component, reducing front surface interception. Running still wins from the time perspective on top surface rain, but the front surface calculation now favors faster movement rather than being neutral. Running is even better when wind is at your back. Now consider rain driven by a wind blowing from directly in front of you. The rain now falls toward you horizontally as well as vertically. Your front surface is being pelted by both vertically intercepted horizontal rain and horizontally driven wind rain simultaneously. Every second you spend out in this rain, your front gets hit from two directions. Running gets you out of this situation faster, which matters because front surface exposure time now matters. It is no longer true that front surface interception is purely distance dependent. With a headwind, the time you spend in the rain affects how much your front surface receives. So running faster reduces total front surface exposure as well as top surface exposure. But here is the wrinkle. Running faster into a headwind increases the relative velocity between your front surface and the wind-driven rain, increasing the rate of front surface interception per second. So running faster gets you to the destination faster. Good, but also increases your per second front surface soaking rate. Bad. Whether the speed benefit outweighs the interception rate, increase depends on the specific numbers. The wind speed, the rain angle, the distance to travel, your running versus walking speed. The mathematical analysis of this headwind scenario produces a genuinely surprising result in some cases. There is an optimal speed that minimizes total wetness, and that speed is not always the maximum speed you can achieve. If the rain is driven by a very strong headwind at a steep angle, there exists a speed above which running faster actually makes you wetter rather than drier, because the increased front surface interception rate more than offsets the time savings. The optimal strategy in extreme headwind rain is not to sprint as fast as possible, but to run at a specific intermediate speed. This result has been published in peer-reviewed physics literature and is counterintuitive enough that it is worth letting it sit for a moment. In strong headwind rain, there is a speed that makes you as dry as possible, and if you run faster than that speed, you end up wetter. Running too fast in the wrong kind of rain is worse than running at a moderate pace. The crosswind scenario, wind from the side, produces a similar optimal speed analysis, though the geometry is different. Crosswind rain hits a side surface that would be protected in vertical or headwind rain, and the rate at which rain hits this surface depends on your speed through the rain. Higher speed means more forward progress per second, which does not change side surface exposure rate, but faster movement gets you to shelter sooner. Crosswind scenarios generally still favor running, but the analysis is more complex than the simple vertical rain case. Now, leave the physics of rain itself and address the practical dimensions that the mathematical models typically ignore, because real rain experiences involve factors that pure physics does not capture. Clothing matters enormously and is almost completely absent from the mathematical literature on rain soaking. The physics models typically treat the human body as a fixed geometry object that either is or is not wetted by rain in specific regions. Real clothing is not like this. Different fabrics absorb water at different rates and to different maximum capacities. Synthetic fabrics, polyester, nylon, repel water initially through surface tension and can shed significant rain at low exposure levels, but once saturated become just as wet as any other fabric. Natural fibers, cotton, wool, absorb water more readily, but wool in particular retains insulating properties even when wet in ways that synthetic and cotton fabrics do not. Thick, tightly woven fabrics absorb more water by weight than thin, loosely woven ones. The practical implication is that the difference between walking and running in rain may be much smaller than the physics suggests if you are wearing a water-repellent outer layer, because the outer layer sheds rain rather than absorbing it, and the underlying clothing may stay dry regardless of whether you walk or run through moderate rain. Conversely, if you are wearing highly absorbent cotton, the worst possible fabric for rain, the difference between walking and running becomes larger because every additional moment of exposure adds significantly to your total water load. By the way, if you want to go even deeper into the secret lives of ancient humans, I just launched a full course called The Secret Lives of Ancient Humans. 10 modules, 3+ hours of content, covering everything we never talk about on YouTube. What they feared, how they communicated, what hunted them, and much more. Plus an exclusive PDF guide included. Link in the description. See you inside. Hair deserves specific mention because hair is extraordinarily absorbent relative to its mass and surface area, and because it is the body part that most people most urgently want to keep dry, and that is most directly affected by top surface rain, the component that running reduces. The top surface rain is the hair-soaking rain. Running faster reduces top surface exposure time. If you care primarily about your hair, running is specifically the right strategy for reducing the dimension of rain exposure that affects hair most directly. Temperature interacts with rain soaking in ways that affect the running versus walking decision beyond the purely water quantity question. Cold rain in combination with wind creates wind chill on wet skin and wet clothing that can produce genuinely dangerous heat loss rates in conditions that would be merely unpleasant without the soaking. Running generates body heat that partially offsets this cooling effect. In cold, wet, windy conditions, running produces warmth through metabolic heat generation that walking does not, making running preferable not just for minimizing water collection, but for managing the thermal consequences of whatever water has already been collected. Hot, humid conditions with warm rain present the opposite calculation. Running in warm rain when you are already warm produces sweating that can make you wetter from the inside than the rain was making you from the outside. A person who sprints through warm summer rain and arrives at their destination drenched in both rain and sweat has potentially made themselves more uncomfortable than a person who walked at a pace that kept metabolic heat generation lower. In warm rain, the optimal strategy might be a moderate jogging pace that gets you there faster than walking, but does not generate the sweating that comes with full exertion. The physiological cost of running versus walking is another factor that mathematical models ignore, but that matters practically. Running uses approximately 3 to 4 times more energy per unit time than walking, though it covers ground faster and thus uses roughly 2 to 3 times more energy per unit distance for a given journey. If you are already cold and wet, the energy expenditure of running provides the benefit of metabolic heat generation. If you are wearing dress shoes that were not designed for running, sprinting increases the risk of slipping on wet pavement, a risk that the mathematics of rain soaking does not include, but that the mathematics of hospital visits makes very relevant. Social context, the fact that people observe us running through rain and form impressions based on this observation, is normally outside the scope of physics papers but is intensely relevant to actual human decision-making in doorways. The spectacle of sprinting through rain, especially if the distance to your destination is long enough that the sprint is sustained and the breathlessness upon arrival is significant, carries social costs that the wetness savings might or might not offset depending on your assessment of the situation. This is not a physics question, it is a human question, and it affects real behavior in ways that the purely optimal physical strategy does not account for. Distance is a variable that changes the analysis significantly, and that most intuitive thinking about this question handles poorly. For very short distances, a parking lot, 20 meters to a building entrance, the difference between walking and running is small in absolute terms because the total exposure time is brief in either case. Running across a 20-meter parking lot saves perhaps 5 to 10 seconds compared to walking it. The top surface rain reduction from that 5 to 10 seconds of saved time is minimal. In this scenario, the practical difference between walking and running is negligible, and the social and safety costs of sprinting across wet pavement might genuinely outweigh the minimal dryness benefit. For very long distances, several blocks in an urban environment, a quarter kilometer across an exposed area, the time savings from running are substantial, and the top surface rain reduction becomes significant. Running versus walking 500 meters might save 3 to 4 minutes of exposure. At a typical rain rate of 10 millimeters per hour, 3 minutes of top surface exposure represents against substantial additional soaking. For long distances, the case for running is stronger in absolute terms. For medium distances, the most common scenario that catches people in doorways calculating, the answer depends on the specific variables of rain intensity, wind direction, clothing, and physical capability. The honest answer for medium distances under typical conditions is that running will make you meaningfully less wet than walking. But the difference is not as large as intuition suggests because the front surface component of wetness is largely distance dependent rather than speed dependent. The optimal strategy that emerges from comprehensive analysis of all these factors is not actually run as fast as possible or walk normally. It is something more nuanced that accounts for direction relative to wind, clothing type, temperature, distance, and the physiological costs of different speeds. For vertical rain with no wind, run. The physics is clear and unambiguous. Running always reduces total wetness in no wind conditions. For rain with wind at your back, run, and run as fast as you reasonably can. The geometry favors speed, in this case more strongly than vertical rain. For rain with wind in your face, run at a moderate to fast pace, but consider that maximum speed may not be optimal. A sustained running pace rather than a flat-out sprint is likely close to optimal for most realistic headwind rain scenarios. For rain with crosswind, run, similar to the vertical rain case. For all scenarios, account for clothing. Waterproof layers change the calculation significantly by making front surface interception matter less. Account for distance. Short distances narrow the benefit of running. Account for temperature. Cold weather strengthens the case. For running through metabolic heat, warm weather weakens it slightly. Account for surface conditions. Wet pavement and inappropriate footwear make the risk calculation relevant alongside the wetness calculation. There is one more factor that deserves specific mention because it is the one that most directly applies to the human experience of being caught in the rain without an umbrella, which is the psychological dimension of the experience. Being wet is partly a physical state and partly a subjective experience. People who are soaked but warm and in good humor report their wet experience very differently from people who are soaked, cold, and miserable. The act of running through rain, the decision to commit, to accept the water rather than trying to minimize it, to make a performance of your situation rather than a tragedy of it, changes the psychological experience of being caught in rain in ways that the pure physics cannot capture. Running through rain feels different from walking through rain. The surrender is different. The relationship to the water is different. Many people report that running through rain feels less awful than walking through rain, even when the physical result is similar, because running encodes a response to the situation, an active decision, while walking encodes a passive endurance of it. Whether this is worth mentioning alongside the physics is a matter of taste, but any honest assessment of what people should actually do when caught in rain without shelter needs to acknowledge that the human experience of the situation is not fully captured by the wetness quantity calculation. So, standing in that doorway, rain coming down with conviction. Destination a couple of blocks away, no umbrella. The answer is run unless there is a very strong headwind, in which case the answer is run at a moderate pace rather than sprint. The physics says run, the math says run, the hair says run. The time savings say run. The dress shoes say think very carefully about the pavement. And somewhere between the physics and the footwear is the actual decision you are going to make, which is, and we both know this, you are going to run anyway, because standing in the doorway watching other people get soaked while you do physics calculations in your head is its own kind of miserable. At least now you know you made the right call, probably.